over the abrupt resignation of the Chief of Staff for British Columbia's Premier Christy Clark. Clark gave a news conference on Monday where she announced Ken Boessenkool will be leaving, but she did not offer any more details about what had taken place. However, in his resignation letter, Boessenkool apologized for, quote, acting inappropriately for an incident 2 weeks ago.
Let's go now to political commentator Michael Geoghegan in Victoria, BC. He helps us to make sense of some of the things that go on in Canada's most western province. So, Michael, this was a bit strange, and we were talking about it here in the newsroom when it happened on Monday. What do we know about this incident? What insights might you be able to provide?
Well, you know, the Premier has been very circumspect in this instance, citing privacy laws. What few details have emerged, apparently it was after a golf tournament. It was at a local pub near the legislature, and apparently it involved another female staffer. One would assume it would be a staffer from the Premier's office, although that hasn't been confirmed. And I guess there was some sort of inappropriate conduct, maybe some inappropriate gestures or touching, I don't know. But the point is that it was obviously serious enough that she made a formal complaint. There was a investigation by the Public Service Commission, and they found that his conduct had been inappropriate. He was in a very senior position, and then Christy Clark made the call to essentially ask for his resignation, and his resignation was offered.
And for the rest of us across the country who don't really know that much about him, I mean, who is Ken Boessenkool? I mean, and why did Christy Clark bring him in to begin with?
Well, that's the other aspect. I mean, he had been a very senior lobbyist in the oil and gas sector, based out of Calgary. That's where his family is based. So, while he was working in Victoria, he was spending pretty much every 5 out of 7 days away from his family. That was no doubt very stressful to both him and his family. And it was a situation also that he was seen as he's a former advisor to Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and it was seen, given that Christy Clark in the past had been a very staunch federal Liberal, as someone who could help repair the bridge between the provincial Liberals and the federal Conservatives, something that she was anxious to do in terms of hanging on to a coalition to go against the provincial NDP.
Michael, we know that the Premier is in a tricky spot these days. If you look at the polls, Adrian Dixon is NDP way ahead. I'm curious what you think this means, not only for her, but this idea of a free enterprise coalition that the Liberals were talking about.
Well, I mean, obviously it's a situation where the Liberals and the business community, by and large, do not want to see an NDP government in British Columbia. However, I think given that, unless they change the legislation, we're going to have a provincial election in May of 2013. Based on the polls, it's virtually inevitable that there will be an NDP government. It's whether it's a majority or a landslide majority. And I think in terms of rebuilding the coalition, which is something that's been done basically in British Columbia since the days of the CCF. I mean, we've had the Liberal Conservatives, then we had Social Credit, and then when Social Credit collapsed, the Liberals came back. It's a thing where that rebuilding exercise will likely have to take place during the next term or two while the NDP are in power.
All right, so you've just touched upon the Liberals and the NDP. What about the Conservatives, the BC Conservatives? I understand they had a convention this weekend. What happened?
Yeah, well, it was behind the scenes. It was actually quite tumultuous in the sense that there was obviously a group of people who were not happy with John Cummins' leadership, including their lone sitting Conservative MLA, John Van Dongen. John had been elected as a Liberal MLA. He had a falling out. Former cabinet minister. He had a falling out with Christy Clark. He crossed the floor. He joined the Conservatives, and for whatever reason, John Van Dongen and John Cummins, who's a former MP, did not get along, and so two factions developed: those that wanted John Cummins to stay as leader, those that wanted a leadership review. And on the weekend, Cummins got about 3/4 of the vote, and so he stayed on as leader. And then John Van Dongen announced that he was resigning from as a BC Conservative. So again, both the Liberals and the Conservatives have had their problems. They've been tripping up, leaving the NDP pretty much free and clear in terms of May.
Right, and so this spiral for the Conservatives, because we were talking to you a couple months back where it seemed like there was this surge happening for the BC Conservatives, and who knew? I mean, anything was really possible. So now that has sort of fizzled out, and you've got Christy Clark as well in damage control mode, I mean, it just leaves the path open for Adrian Dix.
Absolutely, and I think that was part of the reason why they were calling into question John Cummins' leadership, is that the party had plateaued at 19%, and there was a sense of, well, with a different leader, perhaps one that was less socially conservative, they could take more in the way of votes from the Liberals. And I mean, there's obviously people, even though it was called the BC Liberals, interestingly enough, most of the MLAs, the majority of the MLAs and cabinet ministers were in fact federal conservatives. So it's always been a more conservative than liberal government. And I think there were certainly some who liked the idea of, if we're going to have an NDP government, what we should come back with is something that's under the name conservative or something other than liberal.
Michael Geoghegan in Victoria, political commentator. Thanks very much for your time, Michael.
Thank you.